Hey Tribe, it's Cass. Today I am with April, who is one of my closest friends that I've had since I was little, and we're going to be talking about the church today and whether that the church is really about saving souls or if it's just big money. So one of the first things we're going to get into is growing up in the church. We grew up in the same church, and there was always this talk about tithing and being faithful in your tithing and giving 10%. One of my issues with that is that I know in the Old Testament it talks about giving 10% of everything that you have to the church, but that was more or less of for tax purposes and make sure the church house was taken care of. Nowhere in the New Testament does it mention 10%. It just says give joyfully, give faithfully, but it doesn't mention a specific amount that you have to give. So, in my opinion, I feel like it's become more of a big business instead of giving to take care of the church. Because most often than not now, we see that the church is not taking care of its people. In my opinion, I don't feel like it's worth it to give 10% of your income to the church when if your gas and electric bill gets cut off, you can't go to the church and say, hey, I need money for my gas and electric bill. Mm-hmm. They're still looking at you to take care of your own finances, but still give to the church to make sure the church has. But is it really going to the church?
See, and I'm so like not level on my mindset on this. And the reason why is because I do get the concept of giving to the church, because if nobody gives to the church, how does the church grow?
Right.
The problem is there's so many churches out there right now that aren't using the money for what it's supposed to be used for. For instance, like you said, people giving back to the people, making sure that there's a fund set aside for when the people need it, whether it's for housing, whether it's for gas and electric, whether it's for whatever, some type of scholarship fund, whatever. It's not being used for that. It's honestly the church house, and I don't want to get off topic, but the church house in general is not being used for what it's supposed to be used for. Right. I mean, you go into these mega churches, and they look grand and beautiful and big, but then at the end of the day, when you have homeless people laying on the street and you have people who don't have a home, or you have disaster areas where there's floods and there's hurricanes, these churches, these mega churches who are asking for all this money aren't opening their doors for these people to come and lay in and sleep in. They're not feeding these people, and if they do, it's on a designated day. Like, right. Well, we serve the people food on Thursday. Right. So I guess they're not hungry Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Right. So I feel like, and not every church, so don't get me wrong, it's not every church. I don't feel like the mass majority, you don't see enough churches that are using the funds for the right thing. So in that being the case, I don't 100% agree that 10% of my income should go to funding the pastor and his car and the beautiful decorations in the church. I can decorate my own house.
Right. So. And I guess that is why I'm so conflicted about it, because I've seen pastors get on stage and brag about taking their wives on expensive vacations and on shopping trips and taking them, all these different lavish places. Not saying that pastors are supposed to live in poverty, because I don't believe that either. But I also believe that you should have a regular job outside of just being a pastor. Because number one, I don't feel like it's the congregation's job to pay your salary for what you were called to do by God, if that makes any sense. Like, I feel like if God appointed you to that position, because I've seen some churches where they have like a parent church, and then they say, okay, you go off and start your own ministry, this place, and we'll elevate you and ordain you and give you a different title. But I've also seen pastors who just pop up out of nowhere, and then they're like, okay, well, see, I'm a pastor. Tomorrow I'm a prophet, then I'm an apostle, then I'm a doctor. It's like, a doctor of what? Who ordered you to take those extra steps and elevate yourself? And with that, more money comes with your title. Like, who is over you, giving you permission to do all this? Mm-hmm. If it's just you need to have a job to pay for all these extra things you want to do. I don't think it's our responsibility as congregation members to furnish your lifestyle.
See, I feel two different ways about that too. I feel two different ways about everything.
It is very conflicting.
So on one account, so I do know some ministry leaders who are strictly ministry leaders, meaning they spend day in and day out, whether it's church, whether it's out ministering, just like any other job. If that's their purpose, your purpose is an everyday, all the time thing. So in a case like that, I do believe there should be a certain fund set aside for the pastor or the leader, or just like sometimes you when you have the bigger churches, you have to have a secretary there all the time.
Right.
Because if you don't have a secretary there all the time, then when people come in and they need appointments and all that, who's going to manage that kind of stuff? So that being the case, that secretary would need a salary. If she doesn't have a salary, how does she still live and hold that position?
Right.
So I guess in the same instance, when you have a full-time pastor, and that means not a full-time pastor who only preaches on Sunday, and you don't see him at the church other than like Bible study, and I do believe there should be a fund. Now this is where the hitter comes. There shouldn't be a fund that he designates. I feel that, I've been to a couple of churches like this where they have annual meetings. They have in their bulletin. I actually go to a church where in the bulletin they actually show you, this is how much money we need for the year. This is how much we've raised so far. They give you a breakdown of what is going on all the time. So you're not in the dark about all this money that you're putting into the church. Where's it going?
Right.
So that's where it becomes an issue when it's secretive. When I see you coming in with Benzes and y'all going on extravagant trips. I can't even afford to take a trip myself.
Right.
But I know that I'm funding all this stuff. But then if it comes to a point that I need it for my gas and lectures, I can't even come to the church and ask. But you have all this money for this other stuff. I feel like it can be done, but it needs to be done in a certain order. It needs to be done in a way that it protects the people and their money, and everybody kind of knows what's going on.
So the church should be more transparent.
Right. I believe if that's going to be your position, I feel like it should be transparent. I don't believe, this week we brought in $5,000, so I'm going to take this much of it. But next week we brought in $2,000, so I'm going to take. No, it should be a set amount. You know how much you need to live, just like a salary for anybody else. It's a set amount. No, of course, as the church grows and it can sustain a bigger amount, not saying that, you just are stuck in that amount. Should you get raised? Yeah. But at the same time, a lot of other factors go along with that, because there does need to be funds for the people in the church, the people in the community. We need to see the church that if you're doing that as a full-time job, you're actually in the streets outreaching. You're out talking to people. You're in these homeless shelters. You're conducting some type of services elsewhere other than just Sunday and Tuesday night Bible study.
And I guess that brings me to my next point, because in the Bible, we didn't see Jesus just staying inside the church. He was out in the streets. He was ministering to people where they were. He went to them. They didn't have to come to him. So another thing I'm conflicted on is, why is it that we don't see as many pastors as they used to out in the streets ministering to people and meeting them where they are? And is that part of the reason why people are not wanting to engage in the churches anymore? Because I know for me, I have 2 churches that live like literally within walking distance from my house. 3 actually. I lived in my house 8 years. I can only remember one time somebody knocking on my door and inviting me to any one of those churches. Well, other than that, nobody walks the streets and tries to recruit people to their church, and just, even if it's not recruiting, is let me tell you about Jesus and what he's done for me and see if you're interested. None of that stuff. I don't see pastors in hospitals anymore. I seen somebody post a meme on Facebook that said something like, if he can heal people in church, why can't he go to the hospital and heal people? Pastors aren't in the hospitals anymore, at least not that I'm seeing.
Unless they have a saint there.
Exactly.
And then they'll show their face just to show that they showed their face, but what are they really doing there? So
exactly.
In that sense, but that's not just pastors, that's the church.
Right.
So I've been to a couple churches where, outreach is literally, we're going to have dinner once a month and bring the church in. So then the people come in and eat, and then you don't see them no other Sundays.
Right.
Nobody's really doing, not saying nobody. Too many churches are not doing proper outreach, because that's even the case of, I may not be coming to recruit you to a church, because that in most ways are going to turn people off. You need to just go because you care. You know what I'm saying? Go out to these houses to talk to these people, to minister to these people. Have things out for the new generation. There's so much going on, and I seen this on Facebook the other day. If your excuse for not going to church is because people are messy in church, people are messy at work and you go to work, people are messy here and you go there, people are messy in the club and you go. Okay, I get it. Yeah, people are messy in the club. Yes, people are messy at work and you go. But at the same time, the church is a hospital. Well, the church is supposed to be a hospital. Nowadays, the church is a fashion show, a competition. You're going to see who can dress the best. We're going to see who praises him the most, or praises him in the most dramatic way, who can speak in tongues the best.
Right.
It's not about the healing and bringing people to him, because everybody's being judged. So you're being judged for what you wear. You're being judged for having kids out of wedlock. You're being judged for how old you are, because you're not old enough, and this is a personal thing. You're not old enough to lead anybody because you're 31 years old with 3 kids. But but it's not a hospital. A hospital, and you know what? This is going a whole nother subject. It might be a hospital if we're talking about today's hospital, who turns people away because they're sick. So maybe if we want to use that term, maybe we don't want to use that term, because honestly, the type of hospital that we really want it to be, the church doesn't accept people as they are, as who they are. It's really a competition, and that's what turns people away. I mean, even the accepting, like I saw somebody on Facebook the other day who said that she submitted her stuff to teach somewhere, and they told her that, okay, so she had short curly hair, and it was like a couple different colors. But I mean, her clothes were very appropriate. Forgive me, her clothes were very appropriate in the thing. She just didn't look like an old 90s type of, she just, she appeals to the younger generation. Right. They told her to send them a more appropriate picture. Appropriate for whom?
Right.
I mean, and not saying that everybody has to conform to, the new generation, but if you don't start learning that change happens,
right,
and meet people where they are, whether it's physically to them, whether it's emotionally to them, you meet them where they are, the church isn't going to grow.
Right. So that brings me back to, is church become more big business, or is it still about saving souls? Because I don't see the big come to Jesus deliverance type services anymore like we saw growing up. I mean, we went to the same church. I remember seeing people lined up to give their life to Christ and falling out and crying. I just don't see that anymore. And maybe I'm just going to the wrong churches, but it's just not something I see mainstream anymore. Nowadays, it's more about getting up and making a mock of God so you can become viral on the internet. Mm-hmm. That shouldn't be what it's about. Right. So I feel stuck in this generation, because as somebody who grew up in church, who studied the Bible, who went to school for theology, I feel like I want to get back into it. I want to bring my children into it, but I don't want them learning the wrong things. And yes, you do go to church for the people, because you're supposed to fellowship with your brothers and sisters. If you can't do that without somebody judging you, talking bad about you, how are we bringing people to Christ and we're not being Christ-like? Mm-hmm. That's defeating the purpose of going to the house of God. Mm-hmm. If you can't even walk into church, like you said, they're judging you for having kids out of wedlock. So what? Mm-hmm. How many of all those same people who are acting holier than thou and judging people, how many of y'all had kids out of wedlock? How many of y'all cheated on y'all spouses? Just because y'all didn't talk about it openly like we do now, mm-hmm. and y'all stayed in a relationship, don't mean you didn't do any wrong. Mm-hmm. Nobody's perfect. So if the whole purpose is to show people how Christ was, why are we turning people away for being human?
Well, Christ was perfect. Well, but to show that he died for our imperfections. So because he died for our imperfections, for instance, to tell somebody because they had a child out of wedlock, now you have to sit down. You can no longer sing in the choir or whatever you want to say, because it's a bad example to the young folks. Right. Wouldn't you think the positive example would be that even through your struggle, you're still serving Christ? Right. You're still not sit down because, I did something wrong. That's where I think the church gets it kind of mixed up. I get the old generation, but this is not the old generation anymore. Right. I mean, at the end of the day, the point is to uplift people. And then on top of it, the church is not the building. Please. The church is the person. So, for everybody to feel like, oh, well, if you don't go to church every Sunday, you don't love God. Church is, church is the person. Right. I can go to church and sit in that building every single day and still not fulfill my purpose. Right. Still not talk to anybody.
And still go straight to hell.
Right. Still not fellowship with anybody. Still not spread the word of God. And I'm going to still be in the same position as I would if I was out running the streets doing what I ain't supposed to be doing. Right. So if that's the case, the church, people need to realize the church is not that building. The church is you. You are the church. I'm the church. You're the church. Our children, each individual person is the church. So we take the church with us, and that's how we're supposed to be living in God, by ministering to people from the church. Right. That we live in every single day, which is ourselves. So, people get misconstrued. Oh, well, you're going to hell because you don't go to church. I am the church. So what hell am I going to? I can serve Christ without having to go sit in a building and listen to you all be judgmental to each other. Right. Because my purpose is to go spread the word of God, and I can spread that without being in this church, because everybody's not in this church. Actually, half of us aren't in the church.
That's true. It is absolutely true. So what do we need to change for this generation to be able to grasp hold of the same concepts and building blocks that we had growing up? Because we really didn't have a choice. I mean, our parents kept us in church on Monday nights and Tuesday nights and Wednesday nights and Thursday nights. Like, we literally didn't get a break except for maybe Saturday after Saturday choir rehearsal. It wasn't all day on Saturday, but we were there every day.
Right.
I mean, we didn't turn out horrible. We ain't perfect, but we ain't horrible either.
Mm-hmm.
But we have some common sense about what's right and what's wrong. Obviously, as parents, we're not in the church every day because we have lives. You know, we don't, not to say we don't commit our whole lives to the church, but it's not as mandatory as it was back then. But what can we change about this generation to still make them want to come in without it being overbearing, but also without making them stick to the old ways?
That's a hard one. Because the thing is, at the end of the day, certain people in the old generation are stuck in this cloud of old generation. But then at the same time, we still have to respect those people as our elders. So I guess one of the biggest things is for the younger generation, or the people who cater towards the younger generation, or the people who realize, what's going on and the changes taking place. Number one, don't let anybody else discourage you. Like, whatever God has led you to do what God has led you to do. He, she, they, just because they don't see your purpose doesn't mean that that's not your purpose. God has given you the purpose, and sometimes relying on other people to see is the problem, because He didn't give it to anybody else. And sometimes they could be trying to guide you without even seeking God before they try to give you the advice. So, number one, you have to have a relationship with Christ. So you follow what Christ told you to do. And then aside from that, everybody, Christians in general, children of God in general, we have to learn to come together. Yeah. It's disturbing to watch some of these other religions, and I'm not a religious person, but watching some of these other religions come together so easily, knocking on doors to talk to people, doing so many things together, and we are in so much competition with each other. Mm-hmm. You got two churches down the block who won't even, they're down the block from each other, but they won't even do events together. They won't. I mean, you got pastors who are in competition for what? Thinking about it. Sorry, I'm going to get off topic. So, there was something you said earlier that something about people ordained. They're ordained to do a certain thing, and then they lift themselves up, saying they go from pastor to bishop to apostle, blah, blah, blah. Now, first of all, I don't feel like there's a big importance on a title in general.
I agree.
When you serve God, you serve God. Mm-hmm. Every particular person is needed in the kingdom somewhere. Right. And everybody's just important, from the janitor to the usher to the pastor to the bishop to the smallest child in the church, because eventually they will be the church. Now, another thing, for the fact of feeling like you need a title in the Bible, where did Jesus go to all these ceremonies and get ordained? How many people in the Bible, for instance, Moses, God just called him. Right. He didn't say, "Oh, well, you can't preach because you didn't go, you didn't go to school. Right. You can't do this because you're not ordained to be a pastor. You're not ordained to be." That's bull. Really, it is. If God gives you a word, that's your word. Right. If God gives you a purpose, that's your purpose. That's like even you got to be taught to be a pastor. Why do you have to be taught to be a pastor when God gave you the word? Right. Why do you have to be taught to teach something that is coming from God?
I agree. So that brings me to my next point, prophesying. Because, like, we grew up in the same church. I've been prophesied to I don't know how many times. And been told, well, you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to do that. On one hand, at the time, it was like, okay, I could see myself doing that. That might make sense for where I am now in my life. On another hand, I've been prophesied. I have my personal business put out there. And in my mind, I'm like, how is it that your prophecy just so happened to go hand in hand with the gospel I heard about myself last week? That doesn't make any sense to me. I find it strange. Like, have we really gotten that far away from God? Because back in the Bible days, God could just talk. And even people didn't get it right away. They listened. They had their relationship with him. Have we gotten so far away from God that we're really not hearing God? I personally have a hard time believing people who prophesy anymore. Because I feel like it's more opinion I don't really give any weight on what God told me to tell you, because it's easy for somebody to say, well, God told me to tell you, and God said this is going to happen. And then when it don't happen, I'm looking like, well, you said God said, and God ain't supposed to lie. And here it is 15 years later, and it still ain't happened. I know his time ain't our time,
Right.
but when you go to somebody and say God said, that person is taking your word on faith, and they're looking for certain results to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm sitting back in the cut looking, I'm like, it ain't happened yet. Like, it just seems suspect to me. So how do we deal with prophesying? Because again, that goes back to, if you can get people to feel good and you can get people to believe, you can put on Facebook, God said your time is coming. I see the post every day on Instagram. God said it's your season. God says, this, and God says your time is coming. It's your time of blessing. But we still struggling.
Mm-hmm.
It's big business to make people feel good, because emotions can make people want to pull out their wallet.
Right. So I'm going to keep saying this. I have a couple different opinions. So I guess one opinion, and this is because I don't want to put everything on the pastors. I don't want to put everything on the leaders. So first, I'll put it on us. So our first thing is, when we get a word from God, that doesn't mean it comes from somebody, but just a word from God in general. A lot of times it's contingent on our actions. So again, we're going to take the blame first before I go into what I feel about the other part. The first step is make sure you're in order, because if we're not in order, no matter what God says he's going to do, if we're not ready for the blessing, he's not going to give it to us.
True.
Because the same blessing that can lift us up can also pull us down if we're not ready for it.
Right.
So that's my first thing. So that's taking the blame. Now, unfortunately, I know exactly where you're coming from, because there are times where I feel like some of the things you prophesy is stuff that you can tell everybody.
Right.
So are you really
prophesying?
Right. Are you prophesying, or are you just saying something? So for instance, I had a situation when I was younger. I was like 14, and a lady called me from the back and was like, yeah, I'm going to prophesy on you right now. You guys better watch out for her. Grown men are going to want her. So, keep this baby safe and whatever. Long story short, grown men did. But then as I get older, I have a younger girl that her dad was mentioning the same thing to me about stuff that was going on with her. And I'm like, but you know what? Somebody prophesied that to me, but now that I think about it, I was 14, I look like a grown woman. Of course. Grown men are good. So it had nothing to do with you prophesying.
Exactly. That's the point that I'm making.
You just took the obvious. And you said it. So, I mean, even that, people saying, in the next however many days this is going to happen, when it's just given, just given like across the border stuff. You're going to get money in so many days. Well, I get paid every Friday. Exactly. So, like different things that, and then in any situation, and that's just how the world works, in any situation, if you're in a situation that seems bad, you're always going to get a way out of it. There's always going to be a way out of it. So, I don't know. I feel like in a lot of cases, and not every case, there is a lot of cases, and I think one of our biggest issues is the environment we grew up in. There are a lot of cases where people just say stuff to keep people there. And some people do it all wrong, because when they do it, they give you details. And then when details ain't nowhere close to what they're supposed to be. It's disturbing. So, but we ain't going to get into that. But, so I guess with prophesying, not saying that it's a bad thing, because honestly, I was told, and I was prophesied a lot of times by a lot of different people, so that I was going to be a prophet. Or that my calling was to be a prophet. Have I tried to walk in it? No. For many reasons. But anything that's my purpose, God will get there. But I guess the biggest thing is realizing no matter what anybody else gives you, number one, always take it back to God. In any case, God will reveal what is meant for you. And sometimes just because somebody says it and it hasn't come to pass doesn't mean it's not going to come to pass. We go back to maybe you're just not ready for it yet. But then, again, that's where you start evaluating the people who are giving you, or that you're sitting under, and start considering okay, Lord, you're going to have to show me.
Right. And
if it keeps showing you, then you either need to make the decision to walk away and find another leader or another shepherd, or keep on being fed the bull crap.
Right.
So, but everybody doesn't I don't feel that everybody has that, It's just unfortunately there's so many that do. And that goes back to the being taught how to prophesy, being taught how to preach. If it's coming from God, you do not have to be taught. Paul wasn't taught. Right. He just was blinded, got his vision back, and then he hit the road.
He just did it.
Right, exactly. For instance, that's even with like the leader thing when we talking about the titles. Peter didn't tell Paul, because Peter walked with God or walked with Jesus. Peter didn't tell Paul, "Oh, you know what? I didn't ordain you."
Right.
You haven't been, following Jesus as long as I have, so you can't do. So if it's from God, it's from God. So anybody that doesn't get it, oh well. Right. They just don't get it. I mean, they just don't get it.
So when we talk about the church being big business versus saving souls, I guess that's another thing that goes into it is people using that gift of being able to prophesy to people or trigger people's emotions to get people to tithe into what they're saying. Because as you mentioned, if it's from God, you don't have to be taught how to do it. But so many times we see where people fall into that trap of staying up in a leadership that's not going anywhere. And they can see it. People aren't blind to it. I don't know if it's a comfort thing or if it's being afraid to go against authority or assumed authority or whatever it is. But we see it with a lot of people who are in these dead-end churches that's not growing, not prospering, and they're just afraid to move from up under that leadership. And I think that's one of the problems with our society is that a lot of times we get so stuck in the same normal thing that we're afraid to make change.
Well, one of the biggest things is we're following that shepherd instead of following God.
Right.
So you have to hear it from him like, "Oh, I used to hate it growing up in church." Well, pastor didn't say it. And exactly. He pastored, and not saying anything against pastor. He pastors a whole lot of people.
Right.
He ain't always got time to get to me and what I got. That's the reason God is there to tell me whatever it is that I need to know.
So have we gotten to the point where we've put these pastors or apostles or bishops or anybody in the place of God?
I feel like a lot of times we have, and that's the reason when that man, although he's a shepherd of God, that man does something that someone doesn't like. Oh, well, he's not a man of God. No, you have to remember he's still a man.
Right.
So you're following the man instead of the man you're following the man instead of the God that's speaking through the man.
Right.
Because realizing that even as a man, he still is a man.
Yeah.
Whether it's a man, female, they're still human. Right. So them still being human, they fall short too. Right. Nobody's perfect. So stop following that person. And then another thing, whatever it is that you want, you sit up under a leader who teaches what it is that you want.
Right.
If you want prosperity, sit under a leader who teaches prosperity. If you want to follow your purpose, sit under a leader who teaches purpose. If you're not being taught that, how do you really know how to walk in it?
Right.
If you're sitting in a dead-end church where they're not making money and you realize there's no real teachings on how to get there, and you probably need to move to a church where they're teaching prosperity.
Because we like to say that it's not about money and things like that, but in the end, it is about money. And even though churches are nonprofit and they shouldn't be getting their money from members and making their members pay tithes is how they get their income, they should be fundraising and things like that. It doesn't always happen that way. So if all your pastors are saying, well, we need money for this every week and none of the bills still being paid, that should be a big red flag. So I think that a good note to end this on would be, sometimes you have to evaluate the person that you're sitting up under and make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do and they're following God. But at the end of the day, know God for yourself enough to be able to go back and say, okay, Lord, what do you want me to know? Don't just take what that pastor or apostle or somebody's telling you and use that as gold. Talk to God for yourself. You have that right and that freedom to talk to God for yourself. It don't have to be what the pastor is saying. That's all there is. You can still talk to God for yourself and get your own answers. If he chooses to talk to you through that person, that's fine, well, and good. But he'll also still talk to you. It's not just a one-way direct line between God and that person, and then you're just in an audience waiting to find out what was said. You can still talk to God for yourself. So that's what we're going to end on today. So I want you guys to check this out and keep this conversation going in the comments, because one thing you will hear me say a lot is that conversation is a catalyst for change. A lot of these conversations, if we don't start them, they won't be had, and things will never change. So keep this conversation going, and we will see you guys next week. Peace. Hey guys, it's Cass. If you like my video, remember to leave your comments below. I will respond to comments, but please subscribe, share this video and keep the conversation going with your friends. And also click the little bell so you get notifications when I post more content.